All right, good morning everyone. Welcome to another Teaching Academy PD workshop. We're continuing the Supervised Assessment series this morning with another session around Microsoft Bookings. This is an apt time for us to be doing this as we're now seeing the first lot of bookings and meetings, etc. happening in subjects. So the whole end-to-end workflow is becoming more clear. We have more questions emerging around its use. We have people wanting to get more experience in what that looks like from both the convener's perspective, the marker's perspective, the student perspective. And that also gives us more information on the type of stuff we need to be addressing in the PD that we run as well. So Beck and I thought it'd be a good idea to run a third session around MS bookings, and it also gives attendees like yourselves the opportunity to raise questions that you've come across in that process or things that you want to know about if we haven't touched on them yet. So that's loosely why we've gathered here today. We're going to be talking about the actual meeting process itself and recordings, etc. But as I mentioned before, we're going to be looking at it from front to back, from end to end, from a variety of different perspectives. I have shared the Padlet that I'm using as my dance card today in the chat. So I will kick that off, but most of the time we'll be in system unless we have specific points where we'll be referring to the deck. So let's begin by having a look at some of the common issues that we've already seen crop up. I don't mean common as in they've been happening a lot. I should say that there's some of the things that have cropped up already. So the first question that we get is, where do I find bookings? And that's a two-part response. The first part being you should be looking out for the email. The staff member needs to be looking out for the email where they've been invited to access a school's shared booking page. I've got a snip there on the Padlet of what that email looks like. And this needs to be opened and clicking on Go to Bookings at least once. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to access that page. That must be done. So any staff member that says, I can't see it, I've been to the bookings page and I can't see my school, it means that they haven't opened that email. They haven't clicked on Go to Bookings, which effectively is accepting the invite. So that has to happen. Otherwise, they're just not going to be able to see the school's page. Once you have accepted that, however, you may not necessarily need to trawl through your emails to try and find that original link, etc. to find the page. You can just use the base page for bookings, which is outlook.office.com/bookings. And if you click on that, it will open the bookings page for you, and it will show you the one or more shared school booking pages that you have access to. And for most staff, there'll just be one of these. So that's something that they may end up wanting to bookmark, etc., favorite, whatever the case may be. But you can go straight to that page without having to try and find that original email. But you're going to get that question. It's going to happen, I guarantee it. Oh, I can't see my school's page. This is why. Accept the email, then you can thereafter access the bookings page. Next one. When you open bookings, and you go into your school shared booking page, there's a lot of information. It's a busy interface, and I might just open it up so I can demonstrate my point here. We'll move the deck over there. Let's jump into this one. Right, there's a whole lot of information on here, and if they actually have some services and bookings happen at the same time, or the dates that you're looking at in here, this is going to be filled with information. So my first piece of advice here is, we really don't want people playing around with a lot of the settings on this first entry page. Most of the functionality that you want in bookings can be accessed through either the Services tab on the left, where you can either create your own service or access one that you've already made and then make changes, or potentially through the Staff tab if you're adjusting your own individual staff settings. You really shouldn't be touching just about anything else in this main left menu on the left. And the reason for that is pretty straightforward. When we look at it, this is potentially going to make changes. If I wait for this thing to open, for some reason it's very slow. Never mind, we'll try here. Making any changes to these settings will actually impact the whole school account. We really don't want that. So stick to operating inside either services or staff is my first point of advice. And if you're dealing with markers or conveners, etc., that are coming into this service for the first time, steer them towards those two options. That's where we're mostly going to be working inside bookings. So for example, after you've created a service, in the event that you were going to be wanting to change hours, for example, around the service, well, you could change the service hours by editing it. I'm not going to be adjusting these guys. Service, but under the availability options, you'll have the original hours that they've set up for the service event. In this case, it's running between these dates. That's one place you could adjust that. Another area that they might be referring to look at hours and availability is for each individual staff member. And the way that you could do that without having to mess around with the main menu over here on the left, inside this actual service, you'll see that we've got these tabs across here on the right, and there's one for staff. So I could actually click on staff, find a staff member in here, click on their name, and you can see that we have the option there to edit the staff member's account. So it takes you to the same place. You just don't need to be messing around with those menus on the left. All of it can be done from inside the service options. So it's important to note that. We don't want people clicking around and making changes to school level options. All right, moving right along. When you actually create a service, we have seen that some people have forgotten to turn on Add Online Meeting. So they've set up the whole service, all of the hours, the availability, the labeling, the custom emails, but they've forgotten to turn this on, which means there's no Teams link. And we only hear about it a week later when students are apparently telling the academics, well, I've made the bookings, but where's the link to join the meeting? And then it flows back down the line. The marker tells the convener comes back to us, there's a chain of emails. Where is the link? Well, there's no links because you haven't turned on Add Online Meeting. Without that button turned on, there is no Teams meeting, there is no link, and there's no fixing it retrospectively to provision a link to those pre-existing bookings, which means the solution at that point is cancel all those bookings, turn on online meeting, and tell them to book again. That is the only response at that point. So it's important when you set it up initially that you are working through methodically, turning on the options you need to, including this very important one, Add Online Meeting. And the option underneath, send an anonymous meeting link to customers, means that the students will get the link to the meeting as well. Those two options together are fairly critical in this process. All right, let me move on. Okay, I talked a little bit about availability, and on the Padlet board, one of the slides I have here is about configuring availability. There are three areas, and I might get Beck to talk to this as well if I'm missing anything, that people potentially need to look at. When you set up a service in bookings, you're configuring the service availability or the window of time that the event, for example, is going to run from, right? The bookings are going to be available from. But that's not the only time that needs to be looked at, not the only availability settings. Another one is going to be the individual staff members' availability inside the bookings platform. So if I move this off the screen and we have a look at that and go to let's look at this guy. When you edit your individual staff settings, you'll notice that there is an availability setting in here. The first thing that it's looking at is whether or not it's talking to Outlook and seeing whether or not your Outlook bookings are going to flow through and talk to Teams, allowing bookings to be made over the top of pre-existing meetings, for example, or not. So if this isn't ticked, you're probably going to get instances where students have made bookings where you already have something on in your Outlook calendar. So it probably needs to be on. There are instances where people have said, no, I don't want that. I don't want it messing with my Outlook calendar. So they've set up event windows. Maybe they've blocked out parts of it in their Outlook calendar, or they've made notes, but they still want to be able to use their Outlook slots for other things. That's fine. You can toggle it off. But you need to be aware that underneath that setting, there is also your business hours and availability settings underneath. And if that toggle is off, it looks underneath, you'll see in the text there, turn off business hours to edit availability. Right, it's off by default, which means it's looking down here as well. So that's our next point of reference for whether or not a staff member is going to be able to be booked. Does it fit into this window of time? So let's say that this is sitting on 8 to 5, which is a default setting, but the event or a marker, for example, has said that they're able to take bookings on a Saturday. And then they're asking, why can't I get bookings on a Saturday? Students can't see it in the calendar. It's because in their own individual staff availability settings, it says here they're not available outside this window of time. So it's a second point that they need to have checked to make sure that both of those things have the same type of information in it. Right, it's going to look at this block. Beck, do you want to chime in on that? Have I missed any glaring holes there?
I just wanted to talk a little bit around some of the interactions between the different times that people might find. So some of the most important times are the ones that we set at the staff level. So those office hours that you are setting there, that dictates when you can be booked. If you then enter information into a service for a date period, and you can even set times against those dates as well if you want to get really fancy, those are secondary. Those sort of curb the office hours you've set. So even if the hours within here are set till 9 p.m., but your office hours are 5 p.m., you are not going to be available between 5 and 9 in this booking service because your office hours that are set for you as an individual stop at 5. So there's a few interactions between the different times that it's worth just being aware of. If you set it up so that your Outlook is linked into the shared calendar, that does mean that what you block out in your calendar, in your personal Outlook calendar, during the windows of time for both your office hours and for the service hours, that will be blocked. Now, it is important to understand that if you are not seeing a particular time available, or you want to know if these things are working and flowing through properly, the booking page link that we provide to students is a really great way to double check what is actually taking place at the student booking level. So this will then allow you to see if what you've done to fine tune it, if you know that you're free in your Outlook and your office hours are all lined up, and you know that those appointments should be available in the booking page, not seeing them means that you can go back and start to look at where there might be an issue with some of those time settings. At no point in time do you need to go into any of the other spaces within the calendar. So some people have tried going in and looking at the office hours for the business. That doesn't have an interaction with these times. It really is that staff office hours, service settings, and then whether it is pulling in from Outlook or not. So that is something to just be really aware of with regards to these elements. So if you are coming in here to try and fix a problem of the appointments aren't flowing through to the students page, I guarantee this is not where we're going to find the result. But what we have found is people closing the entire service for everyone in the calendar by turning all those office hours off and doing those kinds of things. So if there is a problem with the times, have a look at those spaces. If you're really stuck, please do log a Sherwell for support, and we can work through looking at these pieces with you. But it is one of those situations where there are a few different places where little things can be happening, but that student booking page can be really, really valuable to be able to see what is actually flowing through into that booking space. And if you do change some settings or times and things like that, do give the system a little bit of time to have that roll through to the booking page. So I have been guilty of refreshing after 30 seconds and not seeing the thing having taken effect and gone in and started playing with other stuff. And then randomly it all starts working. And at that point, I then don't know which bit worked. So do give it a little bit of time, like a minute or two, just to flow through, reopen that booking link for the students and see if that's had the effect that you need. If you do need to pause students being able to make bookings while you resolve these things, the best option is to hide the page in Brightspace that has the link where they're making the bookings, rather than playing with your booking settings. Just to give a little bit of a tip around, if you do need to halt bookings while you're fixing some of these, that is a great way to do it. If you're really struggling with a particular staff member in a service, so there's a staff member whose availability you can't get right, you can remove them from the service temporarily, so that they're not available for booking. But again, it depends on what you're sort of trying to fix. And if you are getting to the point where you can't quite get it to work how you need it to work, please do log a job through the DLT service desk, and we will very much work with you through some of these pieces. Sorry, Kailash, just wanted to do a bit of order of operations around some of the times.
Look, you do you. I'm happy for you to keep going. But I thought I would mention this one before I forget, and that is the last of our kind of mistakes or issues that we've had crop up at this point is markers that have received this message. Please wait for the host to start this meeting when they've tried to join a booking. And the reason for that, as explained over here on the left, is that they're opening Microsoft Teams either having never opened it before, so maybe it's doesn't realise that they're a CSU staff member, the one that's been added to the booking, authorised to be the host, or they work somewhere else where they also use Microsoft Teams, which is a pretty common scenario, and they're signed in with that other identity, that other profile. So in those instances, they're joining the meeting in the same way that a student is. So you don't have the authority to be the host in this meeting, hence you're getting this message. Wait for an actual host to show up. So in that instance, it also means that part of the advice is before you start your bookings, make sure you've signed into Teams, that you've checked that the right identity is signed in, which you get by clicking on your profile image in Microsoft Teams up towards the top right. That'll show you the email address. Make sure that you're signed in with your CSU credentials, and then that way, once you start joining Teams meetings, it's got you as you, and you can join your CSU you, if that makes sense. All right, so let's continue. We're going to actually start having a look through things that you might want to consider leading up to your meetings. And the first one I've got on here is, some of these are going to seem fairly obvious to you, but we're going to call them out anyway. First one is timekeeping, particularly in instances where you've got a packed schedule with lots of bookings happening one after the other that students have made bookings for. Probably one of the worst things that you're going to have happen to you is that you're going to blow out that time that's allocated for each and then have to deal with the repercussions down the line for each successive student that's made a booking, for example. So obviously we want to be able to keep time. Few obvious ways that we do that. In Teams, for example, there is a clock in the top left-hand corner that shows how much time has been used. You'll probably see it up next to the recording detail at the top of our current Teams meeting that the markers could be referring to. They might have an additional timer. It could be on another screen. It could be on a mobile device. It could be anything at all. They could be looking at a wristwatch. All we're saying is being aware of time in this situation is going to be particularly important. Teams will not cut out or close at the end of your booking time. It assumes that you have kind of the agency to keep track of that time and to close things out where you need to. That also means that you may want to be thinking about the idea of how you're going to be communicating to students as they approach time. So obvious things, but just maybe think about it before you actually get to that situation or your markers get to that situation. How are we going to handle that? Next one. I've come across a fairly decent split in terms of how people feel about using scripts. Some people like to go in fairly natural and speak off the cuff and build across it. Others want to follow a detailed sort of methodical script that also gives the marker the prompts that they need and telling them the things that they need to be doing at the same time as giving students information. I think there's probably more that fit into that second category at the moment because we're in a new system, a new interface, a new way of doing things. And so having a script is probably not a terrible idea. And we've provided an excellent one. DLT has put together a great script for people to customize and use. And there is a link to that checklist and script in the Padlet board, also in the support resources that are there. So if I find that in here, in the support area, there it is. The delivery checklist acts as a script as well. And you'll see that it actually runs through the items that you'll need to be looking at, but also potentially some of the prompts that you might want to use. So the idea with this resource is the convener and their markers will customize this to suit their own needs. Change the language, maybe change the items, the terms that are being referred to. But this is a pretty excellent starting point to be able to figure out how you're going to approach the event itself. So I would be referring people to that resource if they haven't already seen it before. I'll stop there for a second. Beck, have we got any questions or comments in the chat or anything that people want to ask about what we've discussed so far? Anything at all?
No, so far we've just had one question about if we are using bookings for supervised assessments, could we consider if we're the only marker using personal bookings? And what I've flagged is just that if it is for assessment, it is best to use the shared calendar because there are multiple people who can get access to that in the case of an emergency or if there are any issues. But that for other uses of bookings, we will be considering and offering some support resources and potentially PD on how to use the personal side of bookings for other learning and teaching purposes. But for the moment, obviously our focus is on getting supervised assessment up and running, and using the shared calendars does come with some really great fringe benefits of having people being able to access that, to verify settings, to cancel appointments on the behalf of people, even if there is only a sole marker at that point. So a really great question and something that we will obviously be doing some more work around as we progress with things.
Thanks for that. And that's an excellent point, really. That risk management aspect of what if for marker, for example, suddenly isn't available and we need to access their service to be able to adjust bookings, etc., add someone else into the mix who can pick up those bookings. We can't do that if someone's made something in a personal booking page. Rules it out entirely. So the answer is do everything inside the shared booking pages unless it's something that you're setting up for a non-supervised assessment purpose maybe. Anyway, more on that another time. Okay, moving right along. We talked a little bit about the prospect of using a script which can help handle those significant items that you're leading up to in the event, but we'll talk more about that when we run through an actual meeting process shortly. Okay, I've put a line item in here about rubric and notes preparation, simply to call out what I think is probably fairly apparent to everyone in this space, and that's before you go into a live meeting with a student, the types of evidence that you're going to be collecting during that and using for your marking process, most notably your notes and the rubric itself, if you're going to be doing any of the in situ marking as well, are going to need to be looked at to make sure that they're fit for purpose for you to be able, for your markers, for yourself to be able to use in that time frame. There isn't really time in that window for you to be figuring out what you're going to be doing with those assets. So you need to have thought about it beforehand. If that means that you're setting up your notes in such a way that you've got subheadings on it or that you've got a particular way that you want to approach it yourself, fine. But at least have spent some time thinking about how you're going to be using them and if in their current form they can be used in that short window of time, or maybe they need some adjustment. In a lot of instances, obviously it depends on the amount of time in the bookings, staff will be revisiting their notes and the rubric after the actual live events have happened to make those adjustments, etc. But what are you going to be doing with them whilst the actual live meeting is happening? At least have devoted some time to thinking about how you yourself and potentially the rest of the marking team is going to be approaching that. Beck, would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to make it really clear too that when you're taking the notes and things during the session, obviously a lot of people want to be really focused on the student and managing that appointment with them. So it can be really good to think through the most natural way for you to take notes. We have some prompts in the checklist to explain that you might be taking notes, that looking down or looking away doesn't mean that you're not paying attention, just to walk the student through being comfortable with that situation as well. But really, with those notes, it isn't about trying to document everything. It is about trying to outline your observation of the student performance. So you're not trying to write down every single thing they're saying, but you're trying to do that kind of meta analysis of they addressed this thing really well, but perhaps didn't expand into this kind of concept. Their approach would have been strengthened by X, or they really did this very well and it shows a really sophisticated understanding. Those kinds of notes can really help you post appointment with some of your reflections and your understanding of that student performance. So it is about trying to capture some of those pieces. But again, as Lachlan has said, it's really important to work through that, either for yourself if you're the only marker, or with the other markers around how you want to do that. Maybe you want to do it differently, but you do want to have them saved to a central folder. Thinking through some of those pieces before the actual appointments can be really valuable, but just making sure that you're setting yourself up to be able to engage in marking practices that can be really efficient, but also really capturing what you need to be able to move into that space. So for some, it might be having the rubric open as well as taking those notes, using buffer time that we recommend built into the appointment window as a way to do some of these processes, and just trying to find the way that works best for yourself and the team that you're potentially marking with, just to have that information available.
Thanks, Beck. All right. I thought as well, not to throw you under the bus here, Beck, but I was hoping that you might have a word to us about your understanding of the importance of evidence collection.
Yeah, so as with a lot of assessment, being able to make sure that we have a really robust understanding of how we have evaluated student learning is really important. Now, the rubric is really central to that, so I don't want to overshadow it. The rubric does have those performance expectations, and so drawing on that as that framework is really important. But it is also a new approach potentially for some around supervised assessment where there isn't necessarily a written artifact. And whilst we might be recording them if they're happening online, there may also be supervised assessment where there isn't a high fidelity replica of the student's performance that you can then engage with. Some might be happening in person, and this is not necessarily a new thing. We have things like work placement where we're not expecting a high fidelity replication of a moment by moment of the student performance. We are relying on the supervisors and the other kind of observations, the student's own evaluation of things that were happening, collecting various pieces of data to inform our evaluation of student performance. Supervised assessment sits in a similar space. It may have a recording that you can refer to, but what's really important to have to be able to overlay that recording is your observations or what you saw from your expert perspective in the student's performance that is justifying your evaluation and judgment that's being led through that rubric. So it is about making sure that you have that information, and it can be really effective to make those really quite brief notes during the student's performance to flag that for yourself when you are going into a space of providing feedback to the student, when you're making those evaluations or fine tuning what you've put into the rubric initially. Those can be really handy to refer back to, and they can be a really good point of information. Say there is a technical failure, say the recording doesn't work or we forget to turn it on, life happens, things happen. Those notes can be a really handy way to refer back to that. But we do also have other approaches that might be worth considering. But just on that point of having a variety of things available is always great. But I do appreciate that for some people, it is about finding your comfort zone with how you want to do this and what works for you and your students, but just some suggestions on things you might want to consider.
Thanks, Beck. We have a question from Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Beck. I think just when you were saying that, I was kind of wondering, has anybody thought about what happens if a student asks for a review of Mark for one of these and there isn't a recording available? Are they just going to be given it, or what?
No, so it still goes through the same process, and that's where the notes and the rubric and the feedback that the marker has given that student will be engaged with as a way to justify or to reevaluate potentially the review of grade. So what comes into scope there is if there isn't a recording, and we do have obviously assessments where there isn't a replica of the actual performance, and we have done review of grades in those spaces before, it does then come down to that observation of being able to point to the skills specifically or the knowledge domains or the competencies that were set within that rubric, and where the notes around their performances positioned that mark. So it is about that justification process. So no, it isn't a default if they ask for a review of grade and we haven't got a recording, then that's just going through. It does then become about that, what are the other pieces of information that we have to be able to determine if there is an actual issue, because sometimes the review of grade is valid and there might have been a miscalibration, but other times it can be about justifying the initial grade that was given. And that can come back to some of the moderation processes as well that we can draw upon to make sure there is that reliability and fairness happening within our assessment processes.
Yeah, I suppose maybe what I was thinking about is how much burden will the student have? Because I know that when students are requesting a review of Mark, they need to be specific and say, well, this is the part of the criteria where I don't feel my performance was fairly judged. But, students are going to be incredibly stressed during these sorts of things, and lots of things will go out of their heads immediately. So how much burden will be on them?
Yeah, and I think that that is where obviously having a recording is great, right? To be able to kind of alleviate some of that burden. But there may be situations where we simply just don't have that. So we are advocating to have those multiple points of information. So a recording plus notes, plus the student's observations, as you've sort of mentioned. But where we start getting into a situation where it's not possible to record it, I think that is where we need to engage around the student's recollection. Also, what our notes can also engage with around that and what is in the rubrics and in the feedback. But I do think that for a lot of our supervised assessment, it is happening online. And so we really are trying to encourage people to turn on that recording, have that artifact, which can lower some of that that stress, I guess, for students. And we do have the opportunity to, like, students can refer to the fact that there is a recording. They get notified that it's being recorded. So we do have some situations in that space, but I guess we can also be evaluating after we've done this sort of first round where we might be experiencing that with students and what some of the alternatives or options might be where we're experiencing that frequency of review of grade potentially, and where we don't have recordings or other artifacts that can kind of lower that requirement for students and for academic staff too. So a really great question, Chris, and happy to kind of explore that further. But hopefully we are getting into a situation where we do have the recording, but where we don't, we having some of these other pieces of information can be really, really valuable.
All right, I'm going to take the reins again here and move us on. We're actually going to run through some situations now around going through the meeting process, joining the meeting, etc. And we thought it might be a good idea. Firstly, Beck, I might get you to run through some of these processes as the marker, potentially,
Mhm.
how that's going to work. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen and hand it over to you.
Brilliant. Thank you. And I'm more than happy for questions as we sort of move through. I'm going to try and show a bit of a technical, where do I find things? How do I open this sort of stuff with regards to Teams and some of the information that markers will have available to them. So I'm just going to share my screen, and you should hopefully be seeing my Outlook where I have a student booking. So I'm in my personal Outlook account. Because I have set up bookings to send through the meeting requests to me, they're coming into my calendar. Don't mind that I've blocked this day out. I did lots of special things to get this appointment in here. If it was how it was, it wouldn't have gotten here. But I can see here that I have this appointment that's been set. So I'm just going to open it. And this is what it will look like for me as a staff member using Outlook once a student's booked an appointment. So I can see the times. I can also see the organizer, and that should be my shared calendar that I've set up my service within. I can see here my student details. So you can see I've booked myself. So that's my private Gmail that I have. It's got the time zone. It has the service name. So this is what I've set mine up. It's got any additional information. And then down here, it has my Teams link to be able to jump in. It also has the meeting ID and the passcode. So if I do need to join by different devices, I can. It's got some dial in by phone information if needed. And this information is also available to our students. So they're able to do that. We have also got information in the booking page that students access to highly recommend that they install the desktop client of Teams so that they're not having to go through some of these processes. But where we experience technical issues, we do have a bunch of alternatives. But for this particular meeting, if I was the marker, I would click this link and it's going to pop open my Teams in my browser. And I can also, because I have the desktop application, you can see that I have this one. Now I won't join this meeting because it will kick me out of the one that I'm in, showing you this. But if I've logged in, it's identified me as the host. So what you can see here is the reason that this has Atchison Rebecca at the end is because that's the student's information. So if you want to know which student you're marking, that will be in the title of the meeting, but you can also see that it was in the actual booking field. You can also go and look in bookings for more information about that student. Here I can run a bunch of tests, put on a background, do all kinds of things. This would be how I would join the meeting. In joining the meeting, the student would click on the same link and they would join this Teams meeting as a guest. As I'm running through doing all the things that we'll talk about in a moment, the one technical thing that I may need to do within Teams is start the recording once I'm in the actual Teams room. Other than that, it should be functioning as a regular Teams meeting with the regular functionalities that I would have. If you get that screen that we were talking about before, where it says waiting for host to join, it does mean that I haven't logged in. I'm also trying to join that meeting as a guest, and Teams is now treating myself and the student as guests to that space. So that is one of the number one aspects as well. So we have also advised to download the app, which you can get for your desktop to make it a bit smoother. Make sure you're logged in as a CSU staff member and that you've tested some of these things in advance. All highly recommended. The one thing I will also touch on, which is I've run my meeting, I've ended my meeting, I've hit record, it's all gone great. Where do I find my recording as a marker?
Can I just cut in there for a sec, Beck? Just
Yep.
point of order. You're a student, so I'm going to talk about that as a marker.
Okay, so In that case, I think then, Lachlan, we can jump back into some of the Padlet pieces that we had around that student experience. But when we get to showing where the recordings are and things, I'm happy to run through some of those pieces as well so people can see some of the options.
Glorious. And I will hand you back the mic willingly at that point. Let me share my screen again. All right, so I'm going to pick up where Beck was there, but from the point of view of the student. No, the marker, my bad. All right, so presumably if I go back to joining the meeting, same as Beck went through, as a student going into the meeting, making sure the interface is working properly, we then get to the likelihood that your markers are going to run through some sort of preamble, introduction, depends what you've put into your script, for example, but it is going to include some level of identity verification. And as we can see here, we have the lovely Adam Lavelle holding up his ID, blurred, for you to see. But after that identity has been confirmed, we're still going to need to remember that we have to commence the recording in Teams. And I have got a snapshot there of where to find that information. If you're not familiar with it, sorry if it's blurred, but effectively you're going up to the More menu and a host will be able to see recording, start the recording. And then the recording timer will appear in the top left, as you can probably see in our current Teams meeting. And then the student will obviously get into their response. You're probably going to find that some level of management of multiple assets is going to be required here as the marker, which means those notes we were talking about before, whether you've got them in Word or somewhere else or on paper, for example, whatever the case may be, that's going to need to be somewhere at hand. The rubric itself, if you're going to be consulting that or making adjustments to it, potentially even in Brightspace, where's that window going to sit? And of course, your Teams meeting and your ability to respond to the student when necessary as a part of the supervised assessment. So there is that consideration around how you're going to handle those windows or physical artifacts if you're using those as well. Remembering, of course, that ultimately the information is going to need to be put into Brightspace. The rubric definitely, overall feedback on the task, and potentially obviously consolidating what you've put into your notes in some way, that's going to inform what you're putting into your feedback and the rubric itself. So handling those in situ and then being able to then reconcile that information after the fact. Some level of thought will need to go into how that's going to work. And some dummy runs, I would suggest, are a good idea. And as Nicole has put into the chat helpfully, thank you, Nicole, everyone is going to have a different setup, but there are some good ideas for where to put things in that image that she shared there. Thank you, Nicole. When you actually get to the end of the meeting itself, because we've started the meeting, you can either manually stop the recording, which you may want to do by going up to More and finding the recording, stop recording option. And then at that point, potentially, maybe you're going to be doing some of those other activities we talked about before, finalising your notes, looking at things in the rubric, etc. If you've built in that additional buffer time, you probably don't want to include that part in the recording itself. It'll just be kind of empty space at that point. However, if you don't remember to do that, when you actually end the meeting, it will close off the recording and it will finalise the recording file itself. One indication that that has actually happened will appear in the chat stream in Teams for the individual marker, and it'll tell you that the recording has finished. You'll see the thumbnail with the timer for it, and the student will not have access to that chat stream because they've joined the meeting as a guest. Right, so that's the first kind of question we get in that space. It's sitting there to show you that the recording has actually finished, but as Beck mentioned previously, we are going to look now at what happens to the recording. So I'll stop there. I might stop sharing, Beck, if you want to pick the pace up there.
Sure, absolutely. So as Lachlan showed, you can access the recording via the stream. So you'll have that as a chat that's in your Teams. But there are other ways to also get to that particular file as well. So I'm just going to share my screen. And what I am showing you is my SharePoint or OneDrive. So in here is all of your regular files and things like that. It shows you your most recent. But under your My Files, if you scroll down, you'll also see a folder called Recordings. And this is automatically provisioned and has every recording that you have technically been the host for. Within this, you can see yesterday I was having a bit of a play around with my session that I had. But I'll just jump into this one to show some of the settings. So this is a PD session that I recorded. I may have a few little elements with that you may not have, but some of the base elements that we will have is, as the host, you will have the capacity to download this file. Now, we're not necessarily recommending that you download all of the students and save them in particular places, but should you need an offline version of a particular student's assessment recording, you can access that and download that to consider where you would like to save it. Recordings default to 120 days, so this one's a little bit old, and it will tell you when it expires. Under the expiry, you do have the option to extend that, to select a particular date, or to remove expiration. Now, I do want to make it clear that by removing expiration, it doesn't mean that that won't ever be deleted or removed from the system. It is a flag, but we do have processes that run in the background to make sure that we're managing our storage effectively. So do not rely on remove expiration, but the other dates are reliable in the sense of you can extend this time frame should you need to have those recordings available for a longer period of time than the default 120 days. And you can also consider moving the recordings to another folder location, which can be a really valuable thing to consider if you have multiple markers, because at the moment, until I choose to share this, as the host of the Teams meeting, I am the only person who has access. Now, we do have the capacity to be able to log jobs with DIT to get to these recordings should we experience any concerns about getting them from particular markers, or if there are any of those situations where we need that. But initially, the recordings that are happening between me as the marker and my students are within my Teams account and within my SharePoint. So coming up with a process that works for everyone about how to have more access to these recordings across the team or for subject conveners is something to really think through. So there is the opportunity to move these recordings into a particular folder. There is also the opportunity to share this so that you can actually then select who you're sharing it with or provide a link and do all sorts of things. Sharing and providing a link doesn't override the expiration of this particular file. So there is a need to make sure that we're just thinking through some of those pieces. That being said, if a student's recording does expire and move into a particular deleted space where you can't access it, we do still have 120 days post that where DIT can retrieve that recording if requested, even though it has expired and appears deleted to us as the users. So that does allow us to have these recordings available in the way that we will need them for particular processes, but also just thinking through what you will need and how you will need it and how people will share this particular piece. So we are in the window of having this thing. You may want to apply blanket expiry extensions to be able to accommodate certain processes, and those are things to think through with the marking team and how best to kind of engage in that space. That being said, the rest of the recording functions as you would expect, in the sense that you can watch this, you can download a transcript, you can engage with this as an artifact should you need to, but also that you are able to have this as a particular file should you need it. But also that we do want to advise that trying to download offline versions of all of your students' performances and put them somewhere is going to get very big very quickly. So it is recommended that that particular download is used only in the cases where you really, really need that file and ongoing access to it. Otherwise, we can comfortably manage most of our processes, including review of grade, with the 240 days, as well as being able to understand that if a review of grade does get logged within a particular time frame and it is going to expire, that may be a case where you download that specific file to have access to. And also for other requirements, I do know that for some accrediting bodies, they do want you to keep samples. And so this may be also a way to get samples, is to download particular ones and have that stored in ways that you agree with regards to your school and other disciplines around the best way to store that. So I'll stop there. Lachlan, is there anything else that we wanted to cover, or are we happy to jump back into the Padlet?
I think we'll jump back to the Padlet. I'll just add, I guess, that I have dealt with a couple of schools now who are following the scenario where they've created a channel in Teams for the school specifically for supervised assessment. And what they're doing with that is adding their staff to that. And that means that they can use the shared folder on a Teams channel, open that up, and their markers simply copy all the recording files in there. Some of them are also creating a folder for notes, which means that the notes that are taken, for example, if they've got those documents, can be copied in. Now, how structured or organized you want to go down that path and whether that's going to work for everybody, I'm not going to wade into, but it certainly seems like a fairly methodical approach to me. I don't know that I would be creating folders for every single subject and putting them in there, but that also makes sense depending on how organized you want to get things. But as Beck said, it's something that definitely needs to be thought about and discussed, if not just within the marking team, but also within the school itself. All right, let's go back to the Padlet, and I'm aware we are fast approaching time, which is good. We're on track. And we're now going to talk about post-meeting briefly. After the meeting itself, Beck was talking about accessing the recording files. I will also mention that the location for getting those files locally is the individual's OneDrive account. If you're not sure what that looks like, etc., find the little cloud icon that sits down the bottom of your, if you're on a Mac, if you're on a Windows machine, for example. I'm not sure on a Mac, but you open that up, you'll see your name and your CSU identity there against it, down to the recordings folder, and then you'll see the format that we have that Beck was talking about before, with the service name, session, if you've put that, the task number, and then the actual name of the participant as well. So that's how they're identified, and then you would copy those wherever you end up deciding that you're going to copy them. Just a word on finishing the marking process, because obviously after the live event, you are going to need to go into Brightspace and finish the marking process, which is probably going to involve adjusting the rubric where necessary, if you're adding in individual criterion level feedback, or putting in overall feedback. All of those things will rely on what you've put into the notes, potentially revisiting the recording that we've just been talking about, and then making those adjustments within the LMS when you're ready. And obviously we finish the marking process in Brightspace by saving as draft, rather than hitting the publish button on the spot and the student getting an email on the spot saying it's all done. That usually happens by the convener when all of the marking is concluded. The last thing I'll point out, and I can get rid of that part of the deck, is that we have added to the Padlet today the support column where we've added in artifacts to support the supervised assessment booking space, including the YouTube playlist where we've added all of the recordings that have been run on supervised assessment. This one will go in there as well. The actual comprehensive bookings help guide. There's also a link to the DLT Supervised Assessment Hub, where Beck and team continue to add other resources in this space as they're created. The checklist that we were talking about before, that contains the customizable script and checklist itself for you to make your own versions. And there's also a newly added student version, a student preparation checklist, which we would encourage you to share with your students after you've looked at it and potentially adjusted it if you needed to do so. So all of those have been added into the support column on the Padlet as well for today. But that's all we have to actually present to you. So we have a few minutes left if people have questions or comments or anything at all to add into this space. Now is the time. Anybody at all? Or Beck, have you got anything that you wanted to add into that space?
No, just to flag that we will be adding to that YouTube playlist with some of the more micro recordings that we've been doing, particularly around accessing the recordings, some of those during processes that we've demonstrated here. So there is some support that's there that's available, but we will also be expanding that too. So we will be making that known once we've added some of those pieces, but just in case that there are things that we showed today that there isn't a micro clip on, there will be very soon.
Excellent. Well, look, I'll stop the recording at that point. If anyone wanted to hang around and chat to us for a few minutes, we'll be hanging around. But otherwise, thank you for coming out again for another of the supervised assessment workshops. We look forward to seeing you at the next one. And I think there's another one happening this Thursday, and we look forward to seeing you there. Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the week.
Thanks, guys.